All right, guys, welcome back to the Chad and Mel Movie Hour. Thank you so much for those of you who made it through the Alien Predator Universe saga with us and maybe even watched Desperately Seeking Susan. So we know now that if you love Desperately Seeking Susan, you're obviously going to love tonight's movie hour, which is Color Out of Space, the return of the Artur Richard Stanley to the screen, starring Nicolas Cage and Jolie Richardson. And this is a movie that I had been wanting to see for a while, but actually just hadn't gotten around to until Chad was like, get your life together, fix it, and watch this. And so I did, and I loved it. And it's H.P. Lovecraft, and we're going to get into all of that. And he also let me know that I needed to fix my life insofar as there's a documentary on Prime. Both of these movies are available on Prime. Um, about director Richard Stanley and his quest to get his more famous film made, The Island of Dr. Moreau. So we'll get into that, but
that one's called Lost Soul.
Lost Soul, thank you. Yes. So I loved this movie. I have lots of notes, lots of thoughts on Nick Cage. But I will hand it over to Chad as this is a little bit of his baby and get us started. Oh, and cheers, cheers.
Cheers. So I was like blown away by this movie. I loved it. I'm one of those people that's an H.P. Lovecraft fan that feels that he's so underserved in film. Film adaptations have always either been hokey or strayed from his descriptions and style of his work. This one is way more true to the source material, which is a great honor to Lovecraft, as we should honor Lovecraft. He himself is not without his faults, but his work stands as very impressive, iconic work in horror. So a lot of horror fans have this reverence for him. And I will say that there's a couple works that had been done that try to adapt him, and they succeed more where they're not naming him and they're not directly adapting him. Two of which would be John Carpenter's The Thing and John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. Two films that everyone agrees are very Lovecraftian, but they're not direct adaptations. Both films I love. But I think that Lovecraft fans and horror fans have waited forever for this film, which hopefully they're saying will be like a trilogy of Lovecraft adaptations. So the next one would be the Dunwich Horror. Will be the next one that he's doing. He's already writing it and working on it. So I really, really hope that comes to fruition.
So you're saying Richard Stanley's actually like going to be? Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So he has said that. And I'm very excited about that. As you know, when it comes to filmmaking, there's so much required in terms of financing and distribution. So who knows, will it happen? But it really should. This film got good reviews. It's a small film. It didn't get, a huge wide release or anything like that. I saw it in theaters and it came with like a Q&A portion at the end with the director and Nick Cage, the batshit crazy Nick Cage.
Or is he genius?
I know. There's so much to talk about, but I just love this movie. Like, I think it was done really skillfully and really correctly. And it's so gratifying to see the return to screen that Richard Stanley is making. He's one of my favorite film directors, actually. He did the film Hardware, which I saw, of course, before this. So Hardware is like it really encapsulates cyberpunk, the whole cyberpunk style and movement of the early 90s is really, really well displayed in this work. So I definitely recommend Hardware. I mean, no film is without its faults, but I love Hardware. I think it's a great film. It's an unusual film in terms of like narrative and pacing. So he's definitely an outside of the box director. I love him though. Like I I always tend to love directors that are more visual, that are very strong with the visuals, more so than some other elements that directors tend to control. But those who are like highly stylized and they very specific about what they want, from
Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick all the way to um, all the directors that we've mentioned. But yeah, Richard Stanley definitely falls in that category of directors. Oh, like when we were talking about David Fincher, has that
Oh,
eye. Ridley Scott definitely has that eye. Some directors don't really have that as much of a visual stamp on the films they make, but some do, and then when they do, I think it's really special. So
yeah.
this film, I was waiting a long time, and I was not disappointed. But you just recently saw this film, so why don't you talk a little bit about Color Out of Space and your thoughts on it, and we can kind of go through it.
Yeah, first of all, every time I see, or just anytime I see something that's an adaptation of Lovecraft or anything is like a reference to Lovecraft, I'm reminded of how much I really need to read his body of work. I've only read like bits and pieces, short stories here and there, but um, I knew it was an adaptation of his. I didn't know until you educated me that this was Richard Stanley's like return to directing, which we'll get into why there was like a hiatus there a little bit later. But you know, anytime Nicolas Cage is in like serious mode, I'm there for it. I'm also there
Right,
for batshit crazy Nick Cage, but like when he comes correct with like a real performance, like a dramatic performance. And in this
right.
movie, you actually get both. And to
Yes,
me, it's a testament to my theory that he is both, like, he's a savant. I literally think he can switch it on and switch it off. And I loved the movie. There were so many things that take place in this movie that I can now see from more recent movies. They clearly drew from this aesthetic and this narrative. um it's exciting, but it's also like, I mean, it's sci-fi. It's certainly horror, but it's definitely like sci-fi, and it centers around a family, which is always a great like grounding arc for any more fantastical or like fictitious narrative. And I just loved every bit of it. I loved that the Necronomicon is in it, which is a direct Lovecraft reference, and I can talk all day about the Necronomicon. The cast was great. Jolie Richardson was great. The kids were great. Um, Tommy Chong is in it, and he's delicious and divine.
yeah,
I really liked it. It's a movie that bears a second watch, but it's
sure.
so good, and the use of color, the use of CGI is really well executed in my opinion. It's a visually
Yes.
stunning movie. I loved it.
I love the use of CGI. I'm very picky about CGI, as you know, as are you. We have high standards when it comes to our visual effects, and they nailed it. They let the effects be in the right places
Mhm.
while applying practical effects as they should have.
Yeah,
So a lot of like the character effects and stuff and the onset like beings that the characters become, evolve into or devolve into, whatever, are practical, which is always works better. If it's a character, it always works better as practical. But if it's
yeah,
like lighting and scenery and stuff like that, landscape work, distance scenery stuff, I think CG always is like really nice. And you
name.
can
I,
never
I
really
named
tell. I
it.
mean, that's where CG really works really well, I think.
I
And like
agree.
you mentioned Nick Cage, so we can get into him first if you want to. I'll say I think this film like really funnels his energy really well because
Yeah,
it gives him the perfect swim lanes for kind of a straight character and then kind of when to like open the valve on the crazy. And so I love that because and people think he's like overacting in this. I've seen some comments. Totally not true. What it
I disagree.
is I think people miss this, but in the film he's becoming his dad And so he's slipping into this accent that's really strange. It's supposed to be his father, who was apparently like belligerent and abusive or whatever. I'm might be taking some liberty with it, but basically
Definitely daddy's
he's
an alcoholic.
right, and he kind of sounds like Trump actually when he does his dad, which is probably not a coincidence. But
Probably not.
it's great. It's great how he plays multiple roles in the same body. I just love that. But whatever else you want to talk about Nick Cage?
Oh man. I mean, I will have to reference Community again, the TV show, because one of the greatest episodes, and we talked about this in one of our other movies where we Aliens, when we were talking about Bill Paxton, and I kind of analogized Bill Paxton to Nick Cage, and insofar as like they both go from like these ridiculous performances to like these really amazing dramatic like tour de forces. And I mentioned Community in that Aliens movie hour because they do an entire episode on a class about is Nick Cage batshit crazy or a genius, and it drives the main character Abed crazy trying to like do the math on it, and as it does the rest of us. But I just think that the fact that he can just go off and do the most asinine, just juvenile, dumb, crazy shit, and then come back and do something like this, which to
Right.
your point is spot on. Like this movie was a really good vehicle to funnel his like manic Cage-esqueness and like channel it into a really good performance. But I can't say enough about him. I think he's delicious. I think he's sexy. I think he's brilliant, and I really like him as like a dad. I just think he's so funny, and
Hmm.
he's actually got great comedic timing, and you really get to see that in this movie.
Yeah, and it wasn't too long ago that he did a film called Mandy, which was also like a similar exhibition for him. And it's a great film. I much prefer this film, Color Out of Space, as a film personally, just subject matter wise. But
Yeah.
Mandy was like a really interesting indie film that no big studio would probably make, which
Right.
is why I love it. And so he has had that resurgence with that film, and a lot of like indie horror fans really ate that film up, and uh, so that it's a natural progression almost for him to do this film, which is also like an indie horror, way more out there type of subject matter. And I
Yeah.
love how they push the boundaries in this film. I don't think they go too far. I think they step like right up to the abyss without jumping off. And I just think it's great. Like I don't have that much more to say about it. I think all the actors are great. I love like it's interesting how they have one of the main protagonists who is one of the sole survivors at the end is like an African American character. And of
Mhm.
course there's some like racist elements to HP Lovecraft as a person, unfortunately. So you have to overlook a lot. You have to overlook that when you're
I mean,
appreciating Lovecraft.
the
Definitely.
the book or
Unfortunately,
the story came out in 1927. I mean,
it
take
did.
your 2020 goggles off.
Sure, but yeah, sure. That's a good point. But I want you can't excuse him for some of this stuff, but definitely I agree. It was a long time ago, totally
Yeah.
a different world. And so it's kind of great that Richard Stanley in a stroke of genius is like, I'm gonna make the most lovable person that survives this. This really great, lovable character is
Hmm.
a fine young black gentleman, and he does an
And
incredible performance. And I'm so obsessed with his scene at the very end of the movie after everything, where he's aged and he is looking down.
he's absolutely
Yes, I love that scene. It's so you don't get scenes like that in movies anymore, where you
so
have
good.
this person like this epic like end sequence. Like that would be over the top for filmmaking now, but like
Yeah.
it's so missing
Yeah, he
from
makes it he
filmmaking now.
makes it work. And
He
he
does.
plays his character is named Ward, I think. He's the hydrologist that's working
Right.
on trying to
Hmm.
figure out what's going wrong with the water in this town.
Right.
Um, he really isn't a main character. He's essentially like the narrator, and he kind of
Yes.
frames the movie. He opens it, he closes it, and he has like
Yeah.
a narrative, but he's not part of the family. He's not part of the
Right.
goings on directly, but he has
He's
gravitas. He like has weight to his short time on screen.
right. Yeah, definitely. He's like peppered throughout the whole
Yeah.
film, and the original story is all written through his perspective. So the short
Okay.
story is written in kind of in the first person from his point of view. So that's kind of why. And I reread the short story again, and it's great. It's so
Yeah.
good, and it is different. It is some of the differences are that they take pieces of the meteor that crashed and they bring it to a university and they do all this like laboratory work on it and studies, and they talk about how it reacts to different stimuli, which is interesting and not in the movie. But I love that when a movie adapts like a short story, because oftentimes the main issue with adapting a novel is that there's just so much you can put into a novel that it
Right.
doesn't all make it to the screen. You have to end up sacrificing a lot. Whereas if anything with a short story, you can almost like really like make it lush and like pad it out
Accurate.
in a good way.
Yeah.
So I really hope that he does do more films from these short stories. But yeah, I need to read more Lovecraft because I have a few like anthology books of him,
Yeah.
and I've read quite a few of them, but certainly not all of them. And but yeah, definitely love this film. Maybe we should transition a little into Lost Soul. We can talk about the
Do it.
backstory of Richard Stanley, who is an awesome director, and I feel like could have had and did have in the multiverse a totally different career
I
trajectory. Um, you know,
the
he's such an
movie.
interesting, insightful guy.
I
What were you
know.
gonna say?
No, it's like when we talked about in Aliens, in several of the movies about like the Italian sequel that did get made, but like
Right.
what would Dan O'Bannon's original script look like? Like what would the original concept look like if it was
Right.
actually manifested? Same
like
with
like Dune,
like yeah,
Dune,
yes, like Jodorowsky.
Jodorowsky, yeah,
And now with Stanley's original vision of the island of Dr. Moreau, which I have so many thoughts
yes.
on because this
The
documentary,
artwork.
I
So
had no
Richard
idea.
Stanley is an auteur, like you said, and he
Yeah,
did all this amazing, fabulous artwork for a film called Island of Dr. Moreau, based on the H.G. Wells um, story, and it did get made, but they replaced him as director, and it ended up being probably a terrible movie from everything I've read. I've
oh, it's
seen it, but it's been way too many years to remember.
I I
Do you remember it?
oh yeah, and I explicitly remember seeing it in the theater, and I remember the disappointment. It was
Yeah, I
such
don't
a
think anyone liked that
shit.
film.
Oh, what
Yeah,
a mess. Oh my God.
what a mess. And you understand why when you watch Lost Soul. Lost Soul is one of those awesome film documentaries. It's very similar to the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune, where
Yeah,
they really do a deep dive into what could have been with a film with a specific auteur that never happened.
yeah.
And in this case, it's Richard Stanley and Island of Dr. Moreau. But it did get he was very young. He had done Hardware and one other film, and they gave him this film, and they didn't trust him. They undermined him, and depending on who you believe, they kind of pulled the rug out from under him pretty quickly and gave the film to a seasoned director that had no vision or interest at all in the story.
He
So
was
it
just to
basically
get the job.
became like a dry piece of crap. But
Yeah.
it could have been so incredible based on the artwork that I've seen. There was going to be all of this like religious overlay, like mythology, with the characterization and the plot. It blows my mind to think about. You have
Yeah.
all those themes of creating life and playing God, and there's a lot of interesting stuff to it for sure. So when I heard that Richard Stanley was coming back to make Color Out of Space, I was like, yes, this
Yeah.
is awesome. But what are some of your thoughts on Lost Soul, the documentary? It's on Prime right now, so if anyone has Prime, watch it.
Watch it. If you're a fan of H.G. Wells' history, if you're a fan of Richard Stanley's, or if you're just curious why the island of Dr. Moreau is such a hot, stinking piece of poopy, watch this documentary. And I learned so much, and now I know why the movie's a hot piece of crap, because the rug was pulled out from underneath Stanley. He was replaced by Frankenheimer. I can't remember the director's name. He was
That's
essentially just there to do a job. He had no investment in the project. It had been like written and rewritten, and then Marlon Brando, who had been cast very early on, comes in, and halfway through the filming, his daughter Cheyenne has committed suicide. So by the time Brando's like really like in production mode on this movie and is like shooting scenes, like, I mean, this movie just makes Brando out to be batshit fucking crazy, or at least just like highly, highly, highly eccentric, and just nobody can really work with him. He's speaking.
How can you have respect for Val Kilmer after watching this film?
Yeah, honestly, like it hurt my heart to hear these things about Val. Like at one point, the crew referred to him as a prep school bully. He was basically like just a huge prima donna.
Right. And it's worth saying that he maybe has totally changed since then. This was a long time ago. And I would probably and hopefully he has completely changed his ways. But at that time, according to enough people to make it pretty much fact, he was a total asshole.
Yeah, I mean, this is at the height of Val Kilmer's career. He had already done The Doors. I don't know if Batman had come out yet, but like we're checking peak Kilmer. So he was probably just a young douchebag, whatever. Like
high on that.
Yeah. So whatever.
He undermined everybody. He undermined the director. He made snide remarks to all his fellow actors. He demanded that everyone come to him. He depending on who you believe, kind of sabotaged the film.
He and Brando had like a trailer standoff where neither of them would come out of their trailers until the other one came out. And
that was so great. So like you have Kilmer in his trailer and then Brando in his trailer, and Brando's saying, well, I'm the bigger star. I'm not coming out until he's on set. And you have Kilmer saying, well, I'm the hot shit right now. I'm not coming out till he's on set. Like, fuck you guys. Just make the movie.
It's actually a comedy, because like when they start detailing these two egos interacting with one another, like
they could make a movie on that.
Yeah, where like Val Kilmer has his one off-screen interaction with Brando, like before they're about to shoot a scene, and he asks Brando like, "Hey, because they're in Australia, Queensland or whatever," and they're like, and Val Kilmer asks him, "Have you been to the reef?" And Brando's like, "Reef? I own a reef. I got reefs coming out of my ass." I mean, it's just
so great. That is so like eccentric, batshit crazy Brando, and like
Brando goes up to the German and is speaking like fake German to him, and he's telling him, "No, I'm speaking German to you. I'm really good at German." And the German actor's like, Marlon Brando literally spoke gibberish to me, and like was fully
fascinating was that? This documentary Lost Soul is so fascinating. Like you're really getting a peek behind the curtain of Hollywood, of filmmaking, of fame, and of all these different things.
It's a total what's the word I want to use? I don't know how to articulate this, but it's such a almost like foreshadowing of what has become the norm in Hollywood, with like too many cooks in the kitchen, focus grouping, which we talked about, rights, everything, just the original vision.
Everyone's scared to really go there with like everyone. What should have happened, right, is that everyone just got on board with Stanley because he was a visionary. He may not have had all the tools to be the best director, so you help him, but you have to really give somebody the leeway to carry out the job. And they were scared. He was young and they didn't trust him, and I think specific people were like undermining him back to the studio. So Yeah.
But also, I mean, to your earlier point of him being a visionary, I mean, it goes beyond, as you see when you watch this documentary, it goes beyond just like him being a good director, a good filmmaker. Like, he was like storyboarding and illustrating all of these amazing characters that were like the creatures on the island of Dr. Moreau, and he was coming up with some really like awesome dark shit, like, you know, the human beast hybrids were wearing like human masks, like human skin masks, and like mutant
The
babies.
operating scene where,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
there's
mean, and like
some,
this idea of like Dr. Moreau being like birthed and is like this godlike, just Jesus-like figure. And I mean, Stan Winston is like the head creature maker on the production, and it's like what could have been if they had
and
just
then,
make his movie.
right, and then in the most crazy turn of events, should we spoil it for them?
Do it.
So the craziest thing happens. Of course, they want to fly Richard Stanley out of there. They're flying the new director in. Richard Stanley, they find out, never took that flight. So he's still somewhere like in the bush, like in the wild. And
Still
they
at
don't
like his
know
rental
what,
property. Yeah.
right. So then they find out that he's like down the river from production. And through a series of events, he makes it on set and into the final film as a masked extra. That you can't make this stuff up. It's one
No,
of the
I
most
mean,
wild stories I've ever heard.
most delicious like revenge, you know, even
It's
though
so
it,
great. And it just shows his attraction to that work once he started. He couldn't disassociate himself.
yeah.
And I'm surprised he didn't like burn the set down or something. They all
Well,
kind of thought he
they,
would.
they kept talking about literally burning the cast and the crew because they just wanted to make this movie and it was a nightmare for everybody. And the cast kept saying, "Oh, we're going to burn this shit to the ground," and they were speaking metaphorically, but the
Right.
Aboriginal people that lived there, that they had built a relationship with whilst filming, took it literally and started to like put like a perimeter of like sand or ash or something, like they had cursed the set, like they were
Yeah.
doing this shit to protect themselves. All the crazy
I don't think
happenings, like,
stuff like this even happens anymore. Like I don't think I think you'd be hard pressed to find like a production that is this juicy these days. I think you
yeah.
could find one that's like has as many problems, but not like, you know what I mean? This is just like
So this is like a soap
a
opera. I
soap
mean,
opera. Yeah.
uh, Richard Stanley early on, you know, when they're trying to get, I think Polanski was originally supposed to play Brando's role of Dr. Moreau, and you know, Richard Stanley's like consults his personal witch doctor, a gentleman in London named Skip, and he does like this distance kind of invisible healing practice. And he said after Polanski dropped out, and then Brando got cast, and then it's just like
And then that
insane.
guy fell ill, and Richard Stanley was attributing all of the things that he cast spells on that had initially gone right started to go wrong when he fell ill. So he
Yeah.
thought there was a correlation. Of course, in my opinion, that's nonsense. But
But I
it's
mean,
a
after,
fascinating aspect to the story.
well, I mean, it's so interesting though the way they detail like the timeline from like when Marlon Brando's daughter kills herself and then everything goes to shit. Like a crew member gets
Right.
bit by a spider, somebody else gets struck by lightning. There's a hyena running around that shouldn't be there. There's a hurricane that hits the set. His Skip, his witch doctor, and
Anything else?
his Skip gets. How ironic is this? This is so like H.G. Wells and Lovecraftian. You cannot make this up. Like the witch doctor actually is working in his lab in London on God only knows what the fuck and gets irradiated and then goes to the hospital. His hip gets displaced and then in the traps of flesh eating bacteria. Like
Yeah.
all of this,
I kind
like
of forgot some of that too. There's so much to it. It's just
it's
like it's a story that never ends almost.
how could the production not be doomed? You know, like
Right. So, so suffice to say, having said all that, and moving on, um, it needs to be said that after all of this disaster, Richard Stanley became a Hollywood outcast
yeah,
and like a pariah to Hollywood. So he kind of went. Didn't he say he like went off up into the mountains
Yeah,
and retreated into solitude, complete solitude, after like
he
a few
said like
years in London or
he didn't think
something.
he would ever make a film again.
Yeah, and was so disillusioned by the whole experience that he almost didn't even want to.
How could you not?
So we should all kind of be like pretty impressed that like Color Out of Space got made and is so incredible. It's a gift that we weren't really asking for, but probably should have been, and should all be glad we got.
I'm so happy and impressed with this movie. Like the horror aspects of it are amazing. The practical effects where you see the mother and the son after they've been like struck by whatever the color out of space entity is, which
Mm-hmm.
to Lovecraft's credit and to Stanley's credit, like remains a mystery. Like, and that's just delicious as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
But like the practical effects that are used on her and the son, where like they basically have been irradiated and they've melted together, and she's basically reabsorbing her son. The it's almost like if you were to focus your eyes on it too long, like it would look really cheesy, like the skin and the bubbling and all that. But it's so much better still than CGI. You know,
Is, yeah.
Yeah.
It is. There's moments where they're shaking, and it's like you can always tell when it's a practical effect, for better or worse. It's always gonna have that like really there look. It's never gonna have that like Photoshoppy look that CG has. But I really applaud them for like mixing it so well, because I think they really pulled it off. For a low budget film, they really pulled it off.
Yeah.
And the little boy is great. Before they merge, the little boy is really great. He's listening to the well, and he's hearing the voices of the aliens in the well. So real quickly, the backstory of Color Out of Space is that we get a comet that crashes on Earth, and it crashes on this property of this family who have this farm of alpacas. And so when it crashes, it brings with it a color out of space, which is basically a like it's a metaphor in a way for like an alien disease that would be so bizarre when we encounter it that it would look like if you saw a color that was like really bold and like bright that didn't exist. Like it's a new color to you. So imagine like what a wild experience that would be to like experience a totally new color or type of sensation. So that type of stuff comes as like an alien disease from space. It's such a cool concept, and I love this kind of stuff. But
I mean, the way that this alien entity is like, the way it behaves in the film is like really, maybe there's like maybe some cliches to it, like it can, like it fucks up mechanical and electrical things, like when people are trying to make phone calls, there's interference, time stops.
It permeates the ground, so the fruit they're growing doesn't taste good. So he keeps taking a bite out of the tomato and then throwing it in the trash, a bite out of the next tomato. He can't understand why they taste like bland, like they don't have any taste, because they're like infected, because they're soaking up the water in the soil that's now completely permeated with the color out of space.
And that's why the town is having a water issue. And you have this hydrologist trying to figure it all out. But, you know, one of the funniest, like this family who's like a big city family that comes to go live off the grid, and it bites them in the ass, obviously. But like they're raising alpacas, and Nick Cage as like the dad is just so hilarious. Like when he's trying to like get his kids to like be the alpacas and take it serious, it's like, this is the animal of the future. And there's like this one
it's so great.
To stress to them, and he's like, wait, these are alpacas, and it's just like so well delivered. I LOL'd when he said it.
It's such dad realness.
Nick Cage when Nick Cage is being interviewed by the local news station after the meteor hits, and like he's just like a talkative dad, and he's just kind of like scratching his head the whole time. And then when you see him watch his interview on TV, and he's just like, fuck, nobody told me to get a comb. Like he's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, and it's very much realistic dad realness.
It is dad realness. And then you have Tommy Chong, who's just like the hippie vagrant that lives on their property.
And he's actually great in this. Just like,
Ezra, yeah.
If you
He's
had
got
no knowledge of him, you'd just still be really entertained by his character work in this film.
is there a similar character in the short story?
I think his character's new to the film.
Okay.
Yes, his character's totally new to the film.
I mean, he delivers like there's some really good dialogue. I mean, one of the first lines in the movie when Nicolas Cage and his wife are just like kind of looking out onto their property and appreciating where they live. He says, if you dream alone, it's just a dream, but if you dream together, it's reality. And I was like, okay, I already
Right.
like this. And then Tommy Chong is Ezra later on, when he's like infected and it's just like become the color out of space. He says, it's just a color, but it burns. I mean, there's just like some
Oh,
really
I love
great
that.
like
Yeah.
one-liners. I don't know. I think it's great. And that you mentioned something really interesting about like imagine what it would be like to see a color like you'd never like perceived before and like how that would affect you. I think the movie and the practical or the special effects do such a good job. Like that particular shade of like magenta or whatever it is that's like throughout the movie is so like visually arresting. When you see that little like what does it look like a grasshopper or praying mantis like kind of come out of its chrysalis,
Right.
um, in that same shade of red. It's
Like a
beautiful,
totally alien insect.
super cute. But it reminded me, um, it's interesting because obviously the story, Lovecraft wrote this obviously long before this movie was made and long before Annihilation by Alex Garland was made. But when you see the color out of space towards the end of the film kind of just showcase itself as like this swirl of like colors and static, and the family get absorbed by it physically, it reminded me of the end scene, one of the ending scenes in Annihilation when Jennifer Jason Leigh becomes the equivalent in that movie of the color out of space, like this alien entity, and just kind of dissolves and is absorbed into it. It's just interesting. Like clearly somebody referenced Lovecraft, and then it's so many similarities, and yeah, I mean, what else can be said? Like
Right.
the ending line, you know, the dialogue where Ward is talking at the end, he says there are only a few of us that remember the strange days now. And then what does he say?
Oh yeah.
There are only a few of us that remember the strange days now.
He says in the
What touch?
epilogue.
Yeah, what touched this place cannot be quantified or understood by human science.
I think it's from that sounds like it's right from the short story.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
like the final line he delivers is, "It was just a color out of space." Dot
Yep.
dot.
And
I mean, are you
he
kidding
says
me?
that he will never drink its water. He's looking out over the water, and he knows that that whole area is cursed now.
Yeah. I just love that nothing's explained. I think we need to be doing that more in storytelling. And the fact that Lovecraft did this, you know, 100+ years ago, or
Right.
100 years ago, and that Richard Stanley was true to form and didn't attempt to give any explanation. It's just like, hey, this crazy shit happened, and that's just how it be sometimes. Like aliens are going to come down, there's going to be some strange goings on, and none of it will ever get explained, and it will become mythology, and some people are going to die, and you know, such as life.
And I love Madeline Arthur, who plays Lavinia Gardner, the young daughter. She's really cool, and I just think she's interesting looking too. Like she has like a great, interesting look. And I'm trying to see who plays the surveyor.
I don't know. I don't have my let's see. I'll
find out for us.
Elliot
Knight. So Elliot Knight is the guy that plays the surveyor. I think he's really cute too, actually.
He's really
I'm gonna say all the guys I think are cute in our series.
Please do. Nick Cage.
Gay moments. So yeah, I think he's really cute. I think he like really brings it in that epilogue when he's older and he's aged. Like he wears that experience on his face, even though he's a young actor. He like does it really well.
Has he been in anything else? Because he really like.
Well, he's British. He's a British actor. He was the title character in the British television series Sinbad. He portrayed Merlin on the ABC fantasy series Once Upon a Time.
Okay.
Do you know him from that, probably?
Yeah, I never watched that show beyond like 1 or 2 episodes, and I checked out.
I could not get into that show. I could not.
I tried, but it was a little bit too much of a stretch for me.
So he was in.
I'm here for Black Merlin, though.
Yeah, so he hasn't done a lot of big things, and but he's great in this movie. So hopefully he'll go on to do more stuff because yeah, I think he's great. And so yeah, I mean,
I really liked how they included the Necronomicon, which if anyone's not familiar with it, is a book in the movie. But it's a book that I own, and I first bought when I was probably like 11 years old, and I was like, I'm gonna like study like the Satanic Bible and like all this shit, and got
and
really.
Beaker has a book called Necronomicon too, as well. Yeah.
But it's interesting because Necronomicon, a lot of people, myself included, when I was 11 years old, thought it was like a real occult text, but it's not actually an amalgamation of fictional occult practices and texts and mythology that Lovecraft had in his short stories that became its own entity. And then it's of course showcased in the movie. I think either the bigger brother or like Lavinia is reading it, and it becomes part of the story. But it's very meta, and it's a really just great homage to like Lovecraft's mythology.
It is meta. Yeah, it's meta in the right ways that filmmaking should be meta now. Like right, because Richard Stanley is a scholar of the stuff that he makes films about and with. So he has read Lovecraft his whole life and stuff like that. He's not just a casual fan of this kind of stuff. I think like when we talked a lot in the Alien series, we talked a lot about directors starting with like Resurrection onward, especially like the AVP films. Directors that were fans of the Alien series, but I just don't think they were like super scholars of it, you know what I mean? To be stewards of it. And I think that it's the opposite with Richard Stanley. He has such expertise in a lot of these things. When you hear him talk in interviews, it's readily apparent. And so like I have so much respect for him for that reason.
I agree, and I'm so grateful to you for introducing me to Lost Soul, because if you're a fan of films and filmmaking at all, whether you're interested in this particular movie or Island of Dr. Moreau, it's still entertaining and worth watching.
And even filmmaking, the Hollywood machine, any of that kind of,
There was
just a film of documentary, a fan of documentaries.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a really good documentary. They pack a lot in for an hour and like 25 minutes, but in Colorado Space there was another like slightly meta moment. I don't know if you noticed this, but we're talking about Richard Stanley and Island of Dr. Moreau, which he ultimately did not. It wasn't his fully executed vision, but Marlon Brando was in it. But there's a scene in Colorado Space where Nicolas Cage, once he's infected, is sitting in his living room watching a movie on TV, his favorite movie, and it's a Marlon Brando movie. And I don't know which movie it is. They only show it for like 2 seconds, but I wonder if that was like an intentional choice on Stanley's part to.
It had to have been. I mean, it definitely had to have been. I'll do a search and see if I can find anything on that. But definitely, how could it not have been?
Yeah, and there's the character Ward, the hydrologist, early on in the movie is also reading a book called The Willows, and I need to Google to see if that's like a real book and what that's a reference to. But to your point about Richard Stanley being like a true, not just cinephile, but like an academic, like a scholar of film and film history, I mean, I learned so much from his knowledge in Lost Soul about, like, I never knew this until watching this documentary, which I literally was today years old when I learned this because I watched it earlier before we filmed. But I've read The Heart of Darkness by Conrad. I read it in undergrad, and it's, you know, a classic, right? And I have not read a lot of H.G. Wells. It's also on the to-do list, but I had no idea that H.G. Wells was actually friends with Conrad,
Mm-hmm.
and H.G. Wells had written a book called The Island of Lost Souls, and then what, like a year later, Conrad comes out with Heart of Darkness, and it's basically the same plot, and then like they have a falling out, and Island of Lost Souls never gets like to the level of fame, of course, and canon that Heart of Darkness is. I mean, it's literally on your English lit syllabus. You have to read it. I mean, that was just like such a delicious piece of history that I just
Right.
learned
So
today.
interesting. I totally didn't know that either. And I have a feeling that if you knew Richard Stanley in person, he'd be dropping bombs like that on you
Oh
all the
my
time.
God.
Like, this is the kind of director that I love for that reason. I
We
mean,
need we need to slide into his DMs.
I
See if
love
he'll
that
do a
expression.
Q&A.
I don't know that he has any DMs,
He
but
probably
I would
does.
be sliding.
Yeah, he's off the grid, I'm sure. But it
Yeah.
was so interesting. There was also this really cool factoid early on in Lost Soul where he's conceptualizing his vision of Dr. Moreau, and he wanted him to be a combination of Timothy Leary and John C. Lilly, which, if you're a fan of Leary, if you've ever done acid or you're familiar with the amazing work and research that John C. Lilly did, not only with psychedelics, but specifically with dolphin language communication, two of my most famous people were like, what he was trying to build a character around was just like, I want to see John Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. Give it to us. Like, this is
Yes.
unfair. Oh
And
my
these are all deep cuts, which I am so here
God,
for. All this deep cut edge, all this deep cuttage we got going on.
so much
Um,
cutting.
yes. um, yeah,
Instead of
I
Brandon cheesecloth, as Feruza Balk says in the documentary, she's when she like walks out onto set and like
yeah,
Brando's in
Farouz is
whiteface.
awesome in that documentary.
Why is Marlon Brando wearing whiteface and wrapped in cheesecloth? I mean, it's too good.
And which of course was Brando's. I mean, Brando just started informing how the film was going to be. Well, I want to do it this way, and I don't want that actor to be in the film. Like, arbitrarily
It's Brando,
distancing people's entire careers, like, on the
right?
spot.
Ruining lives.
I mean, talk about ego. But
I now what I have to do and what I know I'm going to be doing instead of homework today is rewatching Island of Dr. Moreau. Like you ruined it for me.
same. If you find it streaming somewhere, let me
I
know.
have like I don't know if you can see this, but like I have like notes going like for one movie and the other like side by side. So like I was rewatching Color Out of Space on mute while I was watching
Right.
Lost this morning. So like I could go
Yeah.
back and just like put things together. But like there is so much in Lost Soul that's just like I just feel like I learned so much about the shit that I care about, books and
Right.
movies. Just so
It's
grateful to
wild how, like, as they were wrapping up or switching directors on Feruza, she was not having it.
I'm
And
not
she's like, I'm going to Sydney, but not to mention it was like on the totally other side of the continent.
that
And she just had that driver take her. And he's like, fuck it, I'll do it. And then they
yeah.
both got in trouble, and I guess they made her come back and they made her be in the film.
But like when
And
she
she's,
threatened to cut herself her heart out of her chest with a sushi night at the sushi restaurant if they don't
yeah.
get their shit together. I mean, it's just so great. There's just so much. And I totally forgot that Morrow from Northern Exposure was like the guy that basically replaced the character Val Kilmer was supposed to be before James Woods got cut. Like, it's just
Right.
like, what the fuck went wrong? Like, it's just too much. It's too
Yeah.
much, but
And did you say that Color Out of Space is streaming on Prime?
I misspoke. It's available on Prime. I had to rent it.
Copy
Um,
that. And
But
it is worth the rent. I have,
oh,
yeah, I have it
yeah,
on digital too. I mean, for the $4 or $5 or whatever.
yeah,
Everybody keep in mind, and I'm gonna get up on my soapbox,
do
but
it.
I remember in the 90s, we all used to rent VHS tapes, which were very low in quality. It would be like five something, right? For like a
Yeah.
Blockbuster rental.
Oh.
It was like five something bucks, but no one wants to pay to rent a
Plus
film now
gas
digitally.
money it took you to get to and from the video store.
Yes. So
And
now
also,
you get it in your living room.
yeah.
Support films that you really love. Support this film and just spend the $3.99, $4.99. It's $1 more if you want it in HD. Always.
Listen,
But
I spent the money. I'm glad that I did.
yeah.
Um, I
And
think
I saw it in theaters with the special thing they did, and then of course I have the 4K disc, which comes with a Blu-ray, and
it would be worth spending the extra dollar to see it in HD, especially if you have a good display. This movie is so
definitely.
visually stunning. Um,
Definitely, especially this film, like the colors, the detail that they put into the CG.
what
Yeah.
else?
And
You're in
I
quarantine.
wanted to say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what else are people gonna do? You're in quarantine. Spring for the fun.
Right. Watch
Watch.
this film and watch. It's a great companion to watch Lost Soul with it, because that, and most people, well, not most people, well, a lot of people have Prime, right? I would say, tons of people have Prime. So if you
Yeah.
already have Prime, you can see Lost Soul for free streaming on Prime, and then rent this. It's like a great couple hours, 3 hours of your time or whatever. Like
Yeah.
really good companion piece. But I was gonna say there's this great scene in Color Out of Space that I almost forgot to mention, where the alpacas get kind of like fused together. Did that
Yes.
remind you of any other film by any chance?
It reminded me of the orgy in Alien Resurrection. Don't ask me why. I
No,
think it's front of mind
no, I wasn't
because
thinking
they're
that.
all fused together and like moaning and howling. But no,
There's a great scene in John Carpenter's The Thing where all the
been,
dogs are kenneled. Remember
yeah,
that? And they go see the dogs, the wolves, the snow dogs, and not wolves, dogs, but they're canines, but they're
yeah,
snow dogs, because they're up in Antarctica, and they're all kenneled, and they go see them, and they're all like fused together, and they become the
yeah.
thing, and their like heads are all like, it's crazy.
It's
That's what
been
it reminded me of.
yeah. I haven't seen the thing since I was much younger, like a kid. So that's
Yeah,
another movie I need to rewatch, especially
definitely.
that and In the Mouth of Madness for your you know, I know how much you love that movie, and I haven't seen it since it
Yes.
came out. So
You
they pair
mean you
there.
mean this movie, In the Mouth of Madness, right
That's the
here
one.
with this lovely poster?
I am referring to the Sam Neill realness that is In the Mouth of Madness. Yeah.
Yes, In the
So
Mouth of
I need
Madness.
to watch both of those, but
Hard
no,
to
it's
see it there, but
been too long since I've seen the thing for that to have been a reference, but I'll go back and rewatch it. I mean, the
yes.
alpacas, I mean, I just can't. It's too good.
Yeah.
It's just there's too many good things in this movie. Like you gotta see it. Um,
Yep.
you gotta see it. I don't know what else we need to tell you.
I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah, I think we hit a lot of notes. It's color out of space, you know? It came from the sky, just like we did, into your living rooms or wherever you watch us. We don't want to know. Yeah, so I was gonna say I want to watch Moreau, but I also want to watch Hardware because I don't think I've seen it, or if I have, I've forgotten about it. So it's
Definitely.
gonna be a Richard Stanley Saturday for Mel.
And on my list is a movie called Dust Devil, which was the second film he directed, which
Okay,
came right after Hardware. I have not seen that yet, so I'm gunning for that film.
on the list. All right, well, any final thoughts?
Nope.
I cannot
It's the
recommend.
most complete expression of a film that we've done so far, that we have nothing left to say.
Yes, and I'm
No.
so grateful to you for always like coming correct with the documentary to accompany pretty much every movie we watch because it's so enriching
Sure.
experience. And so watch Color Out of Space.
I've always, not to go off on another tangent, but while we're
Oh,
closing it down, but I've
oh,
always been one of those kind of people that liked to get the DVD, because you had like the audio commentary from the filmmakers, and then you
yeah.
could like deep dive more, or you could read up on it, or you could go down that rabbit hole on Google or Reddit or YouTube or whatever. And I've just always been that way. And I think a lot of people are that way more now because there's so much more free access to that kind of stuff. But so, yeah, we will definitely continue to link you good stuff and suggest you on additional reading.
Yes, everybody needs to do the homework and do the additional reading and viewing. But with that being said, we do thank you guys so much for watching as always. If you dug this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please comment below if you have anything to share with us on either movie. We would love your feedback and your comments. Subscribe, obviously, if you haven't. Like and subscribe. Chad's music, a link to Chad's music library will, as always, be linked in the description box. So please take some time and check it out. And yeah, our Desperately Seeking Susan movie hour is out now. It's premiering as we are shooting this. So check out that truth. And stay tuned for next time because we're coming at you with Snowpiercer. So get ready for Bong Joon-ho truths. And cheers. Happy Saturday,
Cheers.
y'all. We'll see you next side.